Okay, we're ready. So hello, everybody. Thank you for watching on Facebook or on Public Input or here on Zoom for Let's Talk 2022 elections. Now it's called Let's Talk because we don't want to just give you a presentation. We want to have as many opportunities as you have to ask questions about any of the topics we're talking about. And because we're talking elections, I'm talking too fast for the interpreters. It is in Spanish and English, but we are joined by Corinne Duncan, our Director of Election Services.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me on to Let's Talk.
Okay, so if you have any questions at all during the entire presentation, I am going to be monitoring Facebook, I'm going to be monitoring public input, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat in the Zoom meeting that we're in. And we can tackle the questions as they come because we're going over a few topics today. And I want to give everyone time to have their question fresh in their mind while the topic is happening. So, Corinne, let's start this Let's Talk discussion with something that's been in the news a lot lately concerning elections, and that's election security and accuracy. Let's talk about what processes and procedures election services takes when planning an election, during the election, and after the election to make sure that it is secure.
We definitely started off with a big topic. We could probably spend this whole hour talking about this. So when I like to discuss this topic, I like to split it into three pieces. So first, there is the kind of structure of elections. The integrity is built into that based on the law. This is the law book that we base all of elections administration on. And in that structure, there is bipartisan oversight throughout the whole piece. And I really like pausing on that because to me, that's a special, precious thing about the election administration in North Carolina. It is a place where in a political landscape of a lot of divisiveness, that both of the parties come together for the explicit reason of making sure that elections run fair. So how that's expressed in the system is that all across North Carolina, in each county, there is a 5-member election board that is split into the parties, and their entire duty is to certify the election. So they're doing all kinds of processes. We've already started our board meetings, and we can talk about that a little bit later when we talk about absentee voting. But they're following the process the whole way through to make sure that that everything's been running fairly. It's also expressed at the polling locations. So when we go to our polling locations, there are people of both parties that are monitoring the process and each other. And then there's processes that happen within the office. Anything that has to do with ballots, that's also bipartisan. So there's kind of that theme throughout the whole system that is part of the election integrity. Then the second thing, which really happens at county offices, is prevention. So we do a lot of prevention. And it's hard to know where to start on here. But I think something that's been in the news a lot is voter rolls. So we spend a lot of time doing what's called list maintenance. So we comb through the rolls, making sure that that we take reports of people who have felonies or people who have moved. We have people who duplicate registrations. We also have lists that we get from DHHS and the Register of Deeds of people who passed away. So between elections, we're doing that monthly, and then during elections, we do that daily. And we also have cards that we send out in the mail to verify residency, that sort of thing. When you get registered, you also have to do verification. So each person who registers in North Carolina has to fill out a registration form that has what's called a wet signature. So it has to be an in-person signature. And that form has identification information on it that gets verified. we verify the social security, date of birth, those sort of things, matching with name. And then we also send out verification cards to verify the address. So those are some things that we do continue throughout the year. When it comes to elections specifically, like when an election's running, and I think that, is there a question?
Yes, Nancy asked, I heard today that Mark Meadows was removed from NC voting roles. How does that play into security?
I am not aware of whether that happened or not, but that person would be treated like any voter, so they would have been subject to all these things that I'm talking about. Their verification card came back undeliverable, or all the various ways that we verify address, or if they reported themselves to, they could get removed. There is also an entire process of challenging voters' right to be registered. So that's a process that is allowed in the law, and that's something that our board handles. So if someone challenges a registration, there is a hearing. There's actually 2 hearings that happen. Kind of this pre-hearing with the board to make sure that the case is sound. And then if there does appear to be enough evidence to move forward, then they hold a full hearing. So we're a quasi-judicial entity in that way. So there's lots of different systems set up to be able to handle those issues. That's kind of like the voter roll side.
Sure. So can I bring up, what about like absentee ballot security?
Yeah, so now we're kind of moving into, well, what happens in actual voting? What happens during an election, which is underway right now? North Carolina has a very long absentee by mail period. We also have 17 days of early voting, and we have election day, of course, and things happen after election day too.
And to interrupt you really quick, Corinne, a lot of the dates, we didn't put them out here, but visit buncombecounty.org for any of the dates for early voting, for actually election day, where you can go to vote. All of that information, we're going to touch on it in this conversation, but all of the hard data can be found on our website. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. So yes, and absentee by mail is also another hot topic. So how it works in North Carolina is that a person who wants to go absentee, and anyone can, it's called no excuse state. So anybody can vote absentee by mail if they wish to, but you do have to request it. So we don't blanket send out request forms. So if you get something in the mail that you didn't request, that should be a red flag. You have to request that. And you use a form, or you go through a portal on our website, and you put in information that all gets verified by our staff into our system. Once that gets verified, then we put together a packet here in our office that includes instructions, the ballot, and a return envelope that has a number that's specifically identified to that ballot and that voter. And then that gets sent out, and that person will vote the ballot either in front of a notary or 2 witnesses, and fills out a form attesting to that fact. Then they mail it back to us, or they can come in person and drop it off at our office, or they can drop it off at an early voting site, but it has to be the voter or a near relative. Then those ballots get checked into our office by our staff, and they get reviewed again. So we look to make sure that all of the information that's required is there. And then they wait till the next board meeting, and we have those every week now, to be reviewed by the board. So the board looks at every one of those absentee ballots, and that happened last night for our first one. We have sent out 1,400 ballots so far, which is very high for a primary election, a midterm primary election. So that's exciting. But we have only gotten 37 back so far. So it was a quick meeting last night, which was good, and we spent a lot of time learning that process. And we tried to go through that process at every board meeting, so you can come and witness that yourself if you would like. And then, so once the board has looked through and said, yep, it looks like this voter did everything that they needed to qualify to vote, then that envelope gets opened, the board signs that they certify it, and it gets pre-processed. So I don't know if you remember in 2020, there was some states that didn't allow having these meetings before election day. So all the absentee had to happen on election day. We luckily don't have that. And that's a security thing too. Being able to pre-process and audit prior to the election, it just gives us more time to be able to do that more thoroughly. So we pre-process those, and then they are ready to have the results open on election night, the unofficial results on election night.
So if somebody sends in an absentee ballot, they can't send it in and then go and vote in person because the computer will have marked them as voted.
Very good question. That is correct. So you know, if you decided not to vote absentee and you went and voted early voting, the same thing would happen in reverse. So you get marked that you voted early voting. If you sent in that ballot, it would not only be not counted, you would be reported for double voting. So
and that's a felony?
That is a felony, a very serious one.
Yes. We have a question from Eileen. How can you get a ballot ahead of the election? I don't know if she's referring to a sample ballot or your actual ballot through absentee voting. We are going to go into the 3 types of voting, but Corinne, you're welcome to take that question now.
If that is for absentee, you can request those now. So each election starting at the beginning of the year. So we've been collecting requests for absentee since January. You can do that right now until May 10th at 5 p.m. Now, if you wait that long to request an absentee, it might be a tight turnaround for the post office. So if you want to vote absentee, do it earlier than May 10th.
And you can always submit your absentee ballot to early voting sites, correct, Corinne?
That's correct. Yes, you can submit them at an early voting site or at our office at 59 Woodland.
Okay.
If we're talking about sample ballots, you can go online to, so you can go online to our website, which is just a link to the state board's website, to the voter lookup tool. And that tool is a very, very useful one. So that's a place where you go, you can look up your name, and it'll show you a list of names. And I like to say that because some people stop there. You need to click on your name to be able to see all your information. Once you do that, you can see your like registration information. I think I'm talking too fast. You can see your registration information, and as well as your address, so you can make sure that all of that is up to date. And you can also see all of your districts. If you want to vote on election day, you have to go to that polling location so that your assigned polling location, and that's designated there. It also has all of your districts that you live in. And then it has your sample ballot. So if you're registered with a party, it will have the sample ballot for your party. And if you are unaffiliated, it will have all the sample ballots that you would be able to choose from when you go to the polling.
I put the link to
really
the.
useful for us.
Eileen asked for the link, and I put the link in the chat for you. So if you're not on the Zoom call, visit buncombecounty.org to find the link. Otherwise, if you're in the chat, you can see it.
Yeah, and that's really useful. The sample ballot's really useful, especially for unaffiliated, because in North Carolina, they can choose, they can vote in primary, and they can choose whether to vote in a party or or only do nonpartisan races. And for this election, the only nonpartisan races are the city of Asheville, mayor and council, as well as the new Asheville City Schools District. That one is a new district. So if you don't live in those districts and you're unaffiliated, there aren't unaffiliated races out in the county.
And Martha asked a really great question. And Martha, I hope you stick around because we're going to bring that up later as soon as we finish our security conversation. I just wanted to bring up a couple more thoughts about that before we moved on. And one of them was the idea of, we've talked about before the election, we've talked about during the election, but let's talk about like auditing and after the election, making sure that everything was accurate.
Yes, so that's a very important process, and it happens. It actually happens before the election, during the election, and after the election. So right now, we just got finished with what's called LNA testing, logic and accuracy testing. So that's where we check all of our machines with a test deck, is what it's called, and make sure that the things that we bubble come out as the correct results. So we test every single one of those machines, and then we have our board do it. So, and that's a public meeting. We're going to do that on the 19th next week. So you can come and view that if you would like. So we do that previous to the election. And then for all voting types during the election, we're auditing. So each absentee meeting, we're auditing and making sure that the number of envelopes matches the number of physical ballots, which matches the number of ballots that get scanned into the machine, which matches what the computer, the database says. So we do a continual matching process to make sure that everything is going well. We also do that during early voting. That's a very intense time for us because early voting starts at 8 a.m., which means we start at 7 a.m. The polls or the sites close at 7:30, but then we start auditing after that. So we're usually here till midnight, 1 a.m. auditing all of those sites. And then we come back and do it the next day for 17 days. So it's a pretty intense period for early voting. And then the same thing happens for election day. That's kind of during the process. Then after election day, we have what's called the canvass period. That's 10 days after the election, and we're processing any absentee ballots that were postmarked on election day that came in within the 3-day window that's allowed by law. They have to be postmarked. And then any provisionals that happened on election day. So provisional voting is another security measure. That is when someone presents to vote and for whatever reason, the poll worker can't vote them normally. A good example is on election day. If you have not registered by election day and you present to vote, you will not be in the system. And you do have to be registered to vote. But, you know, maybe a mistake happened. So we need to have the provisional voting happen so that we can take that back to our office and research. Did this person attempt somewhere? We check DMV records, we check archive, we check all over the place to make sure that a mistake wasn't made. It's really one of our most intense voting processes. So that happens during canvass. And then we do what's called a hand-eye count. That's where the State Board of Elections randomly selects 2 of our precincts for early voting locations. And we have to do it by hand. So we will tally the results by hand of all of those.
And you have a staff of 1,000 to do this, right?
We don't have a staff of 1,000, unfortunately. One year we did get an early voting site that had 8,000 ballots. And we had to hand tally 8,000 ballots. And that is to make sure that if a human does it by hand, that it comes out the same as the machine. So that's something that we do. And then the state board is piloting a program. Buncombe County piloted it in the municipal election last year. and it's called a RLA audit, the risk limiting audit. And that one is it's very similar to the hand-eye count, because we still do a hand-eye count, but it's more statistically robust. So it's more statistically robust, but I think it's more difficult to understand. So I like having both of them. But we'll see where that goes.
Makes sense.
And of course, our board looks at everything. They ask questions until they're satisfied that
The bipartisan board.
yes, the bipartisan board.
So you mentioned earlier that you mail something out. One thing that we're always very cautious about here at Buncombe County is making sure that nobody is getting scammed. Now, are there any scams that you're aware of that come along with elections?
The only thing that I can remember recently is that there were reports from the state board that there were people collecting information about the 2020 election under the pretense that they were election officials. And election officials do not go door to door. So if anyone arrives at your doorstep saying that they are with the State Board of Elections or the County Board of Elections, that is not the case.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, make sure that you are checking the proper sites, buncombecounty.org/vote or the state board's website. And if you have questions, just call us and we'll come to the source to figure out whether information is true. Because there is a lot of intentional and unintentional misinformation. So make sure that you're getting the right information.
Awesome. So one thing that I found interesting was Buncombe County has more unaffiliated voters than any other voter registered category. Can we talk about like how unaffiliated voters take part in primary elections?
Yeah, and you're definitely right about that. That is a trend across the nation. And it actually, unaffiliated recently surpassed both parties statewide too. So that's definitely occurring. And in North Carolina, we have what's called a semi-open primary. So that means that the parties, all three of them that are official right now, which are the Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarian parties, allow unaffiliated voters to choose to vote in their primaries if they wish to. Now you can only pick one. You can't choose around depending on the race. So but you can, yeah, your unaffiliateds are absolutely able to do that, and going to check your sample ballots is a good way to help you choose what you'd like to do.
So I'm an unaffiliated voter and I show up to early vote. How does that look for me?
So when you present at early voting, the poll worker will check you in and they will see that you're an unaffiliated voter, and they will ask would you like to vote in a different in a party ballot. And we always have sample ballots at the voting location too, if you need to review it that way. And then you'll choose one of the three, or sometimes there's not all three available to you, depending on what districts are in where you live. So don't be surprised if there aren't all three. And then you will get that ballot and vote it just like you would a nonpartisan ballot.
And I'm going to keep asking the questions that go along with this conversation. But like I said before, any of the attendees watching on Public Input or Facebook or right here on Zoom who have follow-up questions or other questions at all, just ask away. We are definitely going to get to your question previously, Martha. But I wanted to ask one more question about unaffiliated voters. What if an unaffiliated voter is voting absentee? How do they request a specific ballot beforehand?
That's a good question. So on the request for absentee, it will ask you which you would like. And it is important that you choose the, what you actually want on that form, because you might, if you don't choose anything, it defaults to unaffiliated. And in this election, there are a significant number of unaffiliated voters who don't have a ballot because there isn't a nonpartisan race in the county outside of Asheville. So that's can be a surprise. Wait, what? I'm an unaffiliated voter. So just make sure that you understand what you're choosing, and absolutely call our office if you have any questions.
Okay. So we kind of touched upon these topics, but let's kind of officially talk about the 3 different ways to vote and the differences between the 3.
So there are 3 ways to vote. We've started talking about absentee, so that's the first process that starts, and we started sending out ballots on May 28th. So
can I interrupt really quick, because we got a question in from Samir. How is the office looking staffing wise? How many employees are currently there? Is there any type of staffing shortage?
Thank you for that question. Elections are always difficult to staff because of the changing the date and the speed and the short time that's needed, but then gigantic hours. So it's a demanding position. Right now, we are our permanent staff. We have all of that in place. We had some open positions recently that we have filled. We've got some new staff, which is exciting. They're learning the process now. And then we have seasonal staff that help us during the elections. And we're not fully staffed there. Absentee is a little bit bigger than we had guessed that it would be. We knew it would be bigger, but it's a little bit bigger than what we anticipated. So we're still looking for some help with absentee.
And we can still talk about the 3 ways to vote, but since the topic sort of switched that way, let's go back to 3 ways to vote, and let's answer Martha's question. Speaking of staffing, and Eileen asked this on public input earlier this week, engage.buncombecounty.org/buncombevotes. Are there any roles for volunteers in the office or polling places? What about observers? Are there any limitations for precinct officers? People seem to want to help. And Samir did have a follow-up too. How many overall do you have overall numbers?
Oh, so in the permanent staff is actually a pretty small team. There's 9 of us. And then we expand, I think we've got between 15 and 20 seasonal staff right now. During a presidential election, we'll hire 45 in-house staff. And then at our biggest for poll workers, we'll have 600. Well, we'll have between election day and early voting workers, we'll have 1,000 poll workers. So it's really quite the pyramid of people helping out. Did that answer the numbers question?
Yes.
For helping out, there actually are a lot of ways to help out. We talk a lot about poll workers. I think that's something that is pretty well known. There are different types of poll workers. On election day, there are chief judges and judges, and those are mostly people who are suggested by the parties. That's the law. And then there are assistants on election day, and they're mostly recruited by our staff. Then during early voting, that's all of staff recruitments. They're paid differently. So on election day, you're paid flat fees for each of those different roles. And then during early voting, you're paid by the hour. We also have MAT teams. Those are bipartisan teams. Those are bipartisan influence again, that go out to assisted living facilities and help people request absentee ballots and return absentee ballots if they don't have anyone else to help them, because assisted living facilities are restricted from helping voting. That is another piece of security that's placed in the law. You can work in our office. We do that through Spirion Staffing Agency. And you can also come to our board meetings. And if you're very interested, there are vacancies on the board occasionally. You could be part of our board at some point too. We did have volunteers in 2020. That was the first time that we had volunteers, but so far we've been able to cover with the temp staff that we've been able to hire.
So for the most part, it's staffing related. They're all paid, but if somebody, that's for election workers and chief judges and judges. But if somebody wants to be like a poll watcher, that's not something that they sign up through election services for, is it?
That's correct. So there are two different types of observers. There are observers that are allowed in the polling locations, and those have to be appointed by the parties. So if you want to do that, you would go to the party that you're affiliated with and ask to be an observer. And they put you on a list, and that gets submitted to us because we need to know who is allowed in the polling locations. So that's that process. And then at each polling location, there's a 50-foot buffer zone around the voting enclosure. Outside of that 50-foot buffer zone is where campaigning and outside observers are allowed. Those observers are not regulated by the parties or names taken by election services. So there are all kinds of groups that come out, and they can be very helpful. We have relationships with lots of groups that will alert us to any issues that they might see, and then we can send out people to verify things. So the observer process is a useful one.
And I'm going to comment what Martha said. Martha, who was a poll worker or poll greeter, so thank you for your service previously, Martha. But could Corinne clarify sample ballots at early voting are unique to the precinct and that there will not be a stack that voters can pick up and review while standing in line? I've been poll greeter before and noted misunderstandings.
Martha, correct me if I'm going down the wrong path. So during early voting, anyone can vote at any early voting location. So that means that all ballots for the whole county have to be available at early voting locations. So we laminate all of the different sample ballots there for you to review. We do have a few if someone needs to leave, if they realize that they're not prepared to vote, they can take some of those. But we mostly have those laminated. And what I think Martha is talking about is on election day, you have to go to your assigned precinct. And at those precincts, only the ballots that are relevant to that geographic area, that precinct, are available at that voting location. And that's important for two reasons. One is to make sure that people get the correct ballot, that there's not mistakes. But also because if you go to the wrong voting location and you could vote provisionally at a different voting location, but the ballot style that is yours specifically might not be there. So you might not be able to vote on all of the contests that you would like. So that's, if you choose to vote on election day, that's why it's important that you go to your polling location.
So we have another question from Samir. I hope I'm saying that name right. In terms of the Meadows situation, how can Buncombe County ensure voters that the rolls are up to date? Is there any chance someone could be overlooked by accident? What is the checks and balance processes? This is a lot of questions, so it's in the chat if you need a refresher. Do you run into that situation often? What legal ramifications can someone face for being double registered? If we could dive a little deeper into that subject, that would be great. Also, how often are people removed from the rolls?
Yes, we can definitely go deeper into that. So we do all kinds of list maintenance, and we touched on the broad categories of that at the beginning. So we look for duplicate registrations, we look for felons, we look for deceased voters, and we look for errors in the registration database too. We also send mailings out to verify residency, and we take care of things that way. So let's just take one piece at a time. We can start with the residency piece. So first, when you register to vote, you go through a verification process. So we, in addition to the identification side of verification, there is the address verification. And we do that by mailing a card to that. If that card comes back to us, that's a signal that that person doesn't live at that address and they don't get registered. So there's that kind of initial phase. Then we periodically send out registration cards. And actually, that's something that we should talk about. Because districts changed for this election, we sent out 176,000 voter registration cards. So you've probably got one by now. If not, you'll get one next week. And that is another contact. So, and that also would be a verification flag if we got that back. You can also make changes on that card. So if you wanted to update anything, you could use that to update. So there's that. And then there is that's the part of the address verification. Now
So
let's.
People can't be registered in 2 different states, for example.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's another thing. So in North Carolina, we share data among all of the counties. So if you move to another county, you will automatically be removed from the previous county. We share data with other states, so the same thing happens that way. And right now we're talking about registration. That also happens with voting. So that has much higher consequences. Yes, we share data between the counties and between states. The next thing we could talk about is the deceased voters. So there are 2 things that happen there. One is the state has a relationship with state DHHS, and they match death records with our registration databases, and they send that information to us in 2 ways. One is exact matches, so that those are removals that are exact. They're 5 pieces of information all match, so we're certain that that is the same person. The other is a non-exact match that we go through individually, and we verify whether those need to be removed or not. In Buncombe County, we do an additional step of matching with the Register of Deeds. And the reason that we do that is that we can turn that around faster. So we are able to have more up-to-date records, especially during elections. So right now, when absentee voting is happening, we're checking those every day. And this can be heartbreaking, but you have to be alive on election day for your vote. So that's why we have to check all throughout the process, even people who have already voted during absentee. So that's for people who have passed away. And then we do duplicate registrations, which is a very similar process. The state runs an algorithm to look and see if there are anything that's matching that or similar. You would never be able to register 2 names that were exactly the same. So that's a built-in thing of the system. But if there was something similar that is suspected to be duplicate, then we review that and we merge those records. Again, these are things that happen once a month or every day during elections. So we went over duplicates, deaths. Oh, and then there's felonies. So we also have a relationship with the judicial part of things, and we follow those rules, which there are some that are changing right now. Currently, we're holding records for any felons who are not incarcerated, because there is a court a case that may allow those people to register and vote.
Okay. Did we answer all your questions, Samir? In the meantime, we have another question from Elizabeth dating back to our poll watcher conversation. Are all precinct locations required to allow poll watchers?
Yes. There are some private locations that do not allow poll watchers outside the that 50-foot buffer zone that I was talking about. Some private locations can sign up to not allow that, but you have to allow observers inside.
Okay. What legal ramifications can someone face if registered in North Carolina and another state?
Registration is different than voting. The criminal repercussions come when people double vote or attempt to double vote or have the intention of double voting. I would have to check. I don't want to say that there aren't.
Samir, we'll look that information up and we'll send it to you after the fact. Samir is with WLOS, so we can make sure that you get that information after the fact.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we don't have any other questions for that. So now we can go back to the conversation we interrupted earlier and talk about the 3 ways to vote.
Yes.
We can go over it quickly. We kind of touched on it a lot here.
Yes. And that whole thing is meant to be quick too, because it's the essence of voting. So first, you need to be registered to vote. You need to be look up your information and make sure that you're prepared to vote, getting your sample ballot, and then choose how you're going to vote. So the 3 ways to vote are absentee by mail, which has started already, and you can request until May 10th. And then there is early voting, which goes soon, April 28th through May 14th. So that's 17 days of early voting, Monday through Friday, 8 to 7:30 p.m. And then we are also going to be open the weekend of the 7th and 8th, May 7th and 8th, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then we'll also be open that last Saturday, the 14th, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then,
speaking of early voting, we have a question. When will voting records be updated during early voting? My concern is for party volunteers working to get out the vote to be able to determine who has not voted by election day.
so I think that this is referring to the voter list that gets updated to our website. So that happens during early voting, and it'll update the next day. And it's called the absentee voter file. And we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but early voting is technically absentee voting. So anything that doesn't happen on election day is absentee voting. So that's why that file is called that. So you'll find early voting on that file. So also during early voting, you can same day register. You cannot do that on election day, but that is something that happens during early voting. And another advantage of early voting is that there are hours outside of working times, which is helpful, and weekend hours. And you can vote at any of those locations, whatever's convenient.
So if you're watching, to check the listings where you can vote early, if you go to buncombecounty.org/vote, there's a map you can look at that shows all the locations and the hours, just so it's easier to remember than us telling you them now. You can go and look it up.
Yes, and during early voting, we have an interactive map where you can look and see how many people are in line at each early voting location. So it can help you choose the fastest place to go vote. So early voting is the biggest method of voting in Bucks County, and it's because of its convenience. That's also a trend nationally. And then the final way to vote is to go on election day. And a lot of people like to do that as tradition. It can have a very festive atmosphere. And the polls are open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., big long day. And as we mentioned before, you do need to go to your assigned polling location on election.
Okay. So voting is over. Election day has come and gone. When do we get to see the official results? Like, do we have to wait until after this hand count takes place? When do we know when there's going to be a runoff? Or if there is?
Yeah, fantastic questions. And a lot happens after election day that it's actually one of our most hectic times here at the office. So what happens is we have all of the unofficial early voting and absentee by mail results. Those will be posted very quickly after 7:30 because of how we talked about earlier, and North Carolina law allows that. So that's great. So that kind of gets a head start. And because early voting is so big, that can be the majority of the results. So it can kind of really give people an idea of what's happening quickly. So that happens at 7:30. And then as the polling places bring back their supplies, then we will periodically update that website with the results that we're getting. But those results on election night are unofficial. Because remember, we still might have some absentee ballots that come in that are postmarked until 3 days after the election. And we have the provisional ballots that our board has to review and decide whether to approve or not. Both of those categories tend to be very small categories that don't tend to flip the results, but in a close race, it's still possible. And while we're at it, I'd like to dispel the myth that some people think, oh, well, if the race isn't close, then they don't even count absentee ballots or provisional ballots. Not true. Every single one is researched and counted.
So Martha asked, speaking of absentee ballots, are there any drop-off locations for absentee ballots for after hours that are alternatives to the Postal Service?
That is a great question, and the answer is no. You can only return by the U.S. Post Office or by turning it into an actual elections official human who is going to check it in and log it. So those are the only methods: by mail, in person at our office, or in person during early voting. So if somebody ever tries to take a ballot from you that is not an election official, you should call our office and report that to me.
And just a reminder, you said earlier, if you do drop the ballot off in person, it has to be you or a close family member.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So we touched on a lot of being a poll worker and a poll watcher, but we're always looking for poll workers. We have 2 elections to do this year alone, the midterm primary and the midterm itself, and you can't. So let's talk about like what the commitment is, what makes a good poll worker, and is there paid training?
Yeah, thank you. We did miss a piece of the last question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, 2 pieces. So the last is that we have that canvas period, and then our board reviews the entire election. So they have several meetings of where they're reviewing all of the processes, looking at all of the auditing we did, asking questions, just making sure that they feel that the election ran fairly. That happens 10 days after. It's called canvas. Canvas means a lot of things in elections, but in this case, it is called county canvas, where that is where the board actually certifies things. so that the results are not official until that day. And then for statewide races, it happens a little bit after that. So for the primary, it's June 9th, I believe, that the state actually canvasses and makes the entire election. So it takes some time after.
Do you actually count the absentee ballots as they come in, or do you kind of just do them after election day?
We do count those at those board meetings. So that's what the board is doing during those board meetings.
Okay, during board meetings. It doesn't have to be after the election. It can be any board meeting between.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Now I'll bring up the poll workers question again. So.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry.
No.
Other piece that was asked was, when will we know if there's a second primary?
Okay.
So, if the race is that wide apart that we don't need that the provisionals will not change that result, then we'll know pretty quickly after the election. I do believe that it's likely that there will be a second primary. Lots of people know them as runoffs, but technically it's called a second primary. And the legislature this year has chosen a date for that. So if that happens, it will be on July 26th. And I do think that it's likely. So it means a very busy year for
3 elections.
Yes, 3, not just that there's 3 elections, but they got compressed.
Yeah.
You know, we could have had a little break, and now that's not.
Okay. Now I'll ask about poll workers.
I'll allow it now.
Okay. So what makes a good poll worker, and what's the commitment?
Yeah. So again, it depends on what type of poll worker we're talking about. During early voting, that is a 17-day commitment, and you're working shifts. You're working half-day shifts. So there's a morning shift and an evening shift, and there are 2 types of workers within that. So we have captains, which are overseeing the site, and then the workers, which are they're checking in people. They're doing all the other duties that happen at a polling station.
I was just going to ask, what do you want to see more in your poll workers? Because obviously you get a lot. Would you like to see more youth involved in poll working, more working people, more like what are some people that you think would make good poll workers?
Well, I think that one thing that is fantastic in poll workers is representing the community. So making sure that everyone has the opportunity to come and be poll workers is really, I think that makes a welcoming atmosphere out of poll workers. We need people who are very customer service oriented, because the right to vote is a special thing that everyone takes part in. So making sure that we have people who are really welcoming to the process. And then elections over the last 20 years has really drastically changed in how people vote. And so it's not just handing out a paper ballot and sticking it in a box. You also need to know how to use a computer, be comfortable sitting for that long, understand how databases work. So there's definitely a technical component now to being a poll worker.
I'm going to make a recommendation. We always talk about when we go out to eat, we think everyone should know what it's like to be a waiter, to know what the experience is like. I think everyone should know what it's like to be a poll worker, so they know all of the work that goes into these elections and to just experience the back end themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we get told over and over again at what a transformative experience it is for people. And we have a lot of poll workers that come back over and over again. And we also have people who kind of pass it down in their families. So it's a very good experience.
That's awesome. We have a question. Are precinct party chairs and vice chairs still prohibited from serving as poll workers?
Yes. Any office that is held in the party, you cannot be a poll worker.
So if somebody's interested in being a poll worker or sharing this information with people they think would enjoy it, where should they go if they want more information or to apply?
Yes, so because there are different roles, there's the early voting, there's election day, there's ones that are recommended by the parties. It's best to call our office and we can talk to you about all of the different opportunities there are. The parties also have that information too, so you can go either place, but we can help you know the kind of broader picture.
And that's 250-4200, or again, visit buncombecounty.org/vote for all of this information. Okay, so we're wrapping up now, Corinne. This is the last chance to get your questions in while you can, but the last question I'm going to ask you is, what are some common questions that you typically get at election services during a time at election? Like, what are your big phone calls?
So our big phone calls right now is about primaries, because primaries they're harder to understand than a general election. So the biggest question right now is about, I'm unaffiliated, can I vote, and how does that work? And we did talk about that. Unaffiliated voters can vote in North Carolina primaries, and they get to choose. So that's a very big question that we're getting. And then we always get questions about how to register. So we went over that process. It's a registration form, and the deadline to register for this primary is April 22nd. So that's coming up. That's Earth Day. So we get lots of registration questions. And then I'm really glad that we spent time on security, because that's a big topic. And we have people who call and come to our board meetings and ask those questions. And I think it's a really important time to talk about that.
Awesome. Well, no extra questions, so we're going to call it an evening unless you have any parting words you would like.
I just really thank everybody who comes to these types of events, because we really are in the spotlight now. People really do have a lot of questions about things, and knowing about the process and having an open process is what's going to help people keep their voter confidence high, which is integral to really the nation, how our democracy works. So I really appreciate people who come to us to get the information, ask questions, and you're our power users. You really help spread the word about how things actually work.
I was just going to say that everyone who's here at the meeting today or watching on Facebook or public input, we hope that you can become ambassadors for the information we're sharing today, and you can be the voices from other people who might have questions that now you have the answers to. But I'm just going to give a couple quick things. Again, buncombecounty.org/vote. There's a lot of articles and information and phone numbers, everything you need to know to make sure that you get your vote in this year. You can call election services. If you're not super web friendly, it's 250-4200. And as Corinne stated earlier, check out the NC voter search information. Make sure your information is up to date. There were precinct changes this year. You can check out your sample ballots there, and just make sure your information is up to date for the elections. So thank you so much, Corinne, for taking time out of your day today to talk. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.